the discussion questions at the end. And then we also thought if we have some time, we'll open up the web page on the coastal resilience team and the performance elements and kind of give you an update on some of those, and also some of our ideas about where some of those performance elements might better fit in a future Arctic research plan, and get some feedback there. But please feel free to stop me if you have questions or put something in the chat so that we know you have a question or a comment. But maybe we'll just start here with sort of what IARPC is in terms of the representation of the different federal agencies. So there's 14 logos here of all the different agencies that are part of IARPC. And within some of these, there are additional agencies, for example, Department of the Interior, where USGS is located, but also Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Land Management. So there's actually a larger number of agencies that are participating in the IARPC effort. So next slide, Meredith. Just kind of some background, in 2011, IARPC became part of the executive branch, and the offices are located there where that arrow is at the Eisenhower building in Washington, DC. And there it's all part of the OSTP, or Office of Science and Technology Policy. And so that's kind of where IARPC is housed within sort of the federal government structure. Next slide. And also, Colleen or Amy or Meredith and Sarah, if you have extra comments on these slides, please feel free to jump in. So the tip of the iceberg for IARPC is that it is a federal government committee, but we really, in this group and elsewhere in IARPC, really focus on what's below that sort of sea level, if you will, which is the collaborations teams. And that's made up of not just federal entities and people, but all kinds of people, people that are interested, people from academia, Northern residents, Alaska Native and other indigenous organizations, and all other kinds of sectors. And one of the great benefits that we all see from IARPC is this great collaboration space that we're talking on today, and a really amazing website where we can keep track of things and promote things and let you know about activities that are taking place. So if you haven't explored the IARPC website, I really encourage you to do so. You can sign up for a login account, and you quickly are sort of let in, and you can just browse everything. And then these bubbles here are listing all the different collaboration teams that are currently functioning on the current Arctic research plan to move forward on some of these important topics by bringing all the federal entities and other people together. So next slide. And I'll say that sort of this is the current plan of the current structure of the plan now. And it's this structure that's sort of under discussion right now in terms of what's going to be most effective for going forward with the next Arctic research plan. So the current plan has 4 what are called policy drivers. And those are sort of in the upper right part of that circle, those 4 topics that are sort of the main drivers of the entire plan and all the different collaboration teams that are spread around that circle. And so each chapter in the plan has different goals and provides sort of these different objectives for the different collaboration teams that are around that circle. And that's what we're currently working with, that structure. And so what's open for comment and discussion today is this structure working well? Are there some improvements? Are there some changes? And that's what we've put out for comment from a number of different people, including you all, to get some feedback on that. Sort of what we might do in terms of organizing, how we might organize the next plan. Next slide. And so as I said, we're working on this next plan that would start officially in 2022. And that's directed by law, which is the, where IARPC came from. And so this current page right here is sort of what the front page would look like. And I sort of have been telling people that this is all that has been written thus far on the new plan, is just the title page. We very much want feedback before we get too far into organizing anything or putting any words on paper. And I think in the next slide or two, we have a list of sort of how we've started to do that to put out communications that we need feedback and information. So we'll go into that in a minute. So next slide. So just some basic facts about the plan. So the goal is to have the plan align with the current goals and missions of all the different federal agencies that are involved. that support research in the Arctic. And so it is a US federal document. So it is largely written by the federal agency, but certainly with a lot of input from other people. And so it focuses on research that will be enhanced by collaborating. So one of the main goals of IARPC is to get all the federal agencies to work closer together on tough problems in the Arctic, instead of doing all kinds of separate work and potentially duplicating work. So it's really a great space for us all to come together with non-federal folks and entities to make progress on this work and discuss it. It's difficult to address all things that are going on in the Arctic, but IARPC certainly tries to do a majority of it. And there are some topics that we'll talk about in a minute that we feel have been underrepresented in the past, and we're having discussions about ways to bring those more into the Arctic Research Plan in terms of research activities and topics. The plans to date have primarily been focused on basic research, but we're hearing a lot from people that there needs to be more emphasis on applied research, especially for federal entities that have a big part of their mission being providing information for decision making, so for applied research. So that's something that we're hearing that we are considering incorporating more into the next Arctic Research Plan. And then, as I've been saying all along, we welcome all kinds of ideas for research from all kinds of fields and all kinds of perspectives. Next slide. So here's kind of the timeline where we are. So there has been some review and planning so far. It's mostly been bringing people together into engagement teams and development teams and sort of determining who's going to do what. And then we've also talked a lot about how to engage different groups on the fact that we need to write this plan and have it done by 2022, and how to communicate that, different methods of communication, different ways of getting the information out there. So that's been the bulk of what we've done thus far. We've also put out a Federal Register notice that's requesting input on how the plan should be structured and what should be in the plan, and that closes August 2nd. We were planning on having a lot of public listening sessions, but the pandemic, of course, has made that much more difficult. So it's been a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of direct mailings to different communities and groups that are involved in the Arctic to try to make sure we can find ways to hear from people and get that feedback and that dialogue. And then there will be a workshop later this year. I think we have a slide on that toward the end, to bring everyone together to sort of sort through all the feedback and start to put together a draft. And then that will undergo additional sort of review and approval. And then there'll be a second Federal Register announcement and sort of a review of that plan that's in this last box. And we'll gather all that final input before we revise the final plan and release it toward the winter of 2021. So here's kind of a summary of the engagement that we've done thus far. As I mentioned, there's a Federal Register notice that's out until August 2nd. We're working on an engagement strategy with Indigenous communities, but also just all kinds of different people and industries and sectors that we may not have reached out to in the past or thus far. So there's a team that thinks a lot about that right now, how to do those communications. There's a lot of discussion of just synthesizing some of the existing strategies and plans, not just IARPC plans, but there's a lot of community plans out there in Alaska, for example, sort of looking at those strategic plans for those communities about what they're looking for that we could incorporate into IARPC to make sure that the research and the work that's done by all these federal groups and others can address some of those and move some of those forward. So the workshop I mentioned is going to take place in September over 2 days. Let's see, or maybe longer, yeah, virtually, because of the sort of difficulty right now of planning something in person. So that will be a place to pull all this different input together and start really putting some structure down of what we think the next plan should look like. And then there's just a list there of particular places where we're trying to get engagement from to make sure that we really have heard from all the perspectives that we need heard from. And there's been meetings on the IARPC space about some underrepresented research communities such as social science and engineering. And so that's also something that's taken place, and we're open for other ideas about topics that we might need to discuss to get those those inputs as well. Next slide. So yeah, so the Federal Register again, there's really two things that we've been asking for in the Federal Register notice, and that's the content of the plan. So what are the critical issues that federally funded science needs to focus on in the Arctic? And then the organization of the plan, as I mentioned before, sort of is the structure that we have now working, or should we consider a completely different structure or some sort of slight modifications to the existing plan structure? Next slide. Here's all the ways that you can contribute, and all of these are on the IARPC Collaborations webpage. I think Meredith will probably show this once we're done here so people can see that. But there's numerous different ways to contribute information. And there's no sort of set or different kinds of weights applied to the input that we give. If it's, you know, if you put something in through the federal notice, that's great, but we're also going to listen to anything we get through an email or through this online form that we have on IARPC. It doesn't matter where you submit it, it's all going to be considered, and we'll keep track of all those comments in one place to make sure that they're all, you know, all looked at. So these are all just different ways we're trying to make sure we get the input that might be out there that we need to consider. And then some of the things that we have heard, and this may be a slide that we want to talk about maybe when we get to the end of the presentation, we can come back, but these are some of the things that we've heard about thus far through presentations like the one I'm giving today that have happened on other collaboration teams about the next plan. Some of those emergent themes are that we really need to consider the activities and the actions that respond to the input from Northern communities on their priorities. This idea of supporting federal research that's in support of decision-making, that needs to be sort of a bigger part of the next plan. And then also need to consider how to develop and sustain the engagement and the communication with Northern communities, that also needs to be a big part of the next plan. And that's something that is definitely in IARPC's wheelhouse. As you may know, the IARPC group worked really hard on revising the principles for conducting research in the Arctic, and that's also something you can find on the IARPC page. But that was something that had been written by the NSF, you know, over 10 years ago, and we really felt like that needed to be revised. So a number of people in IARPC got together to revise that, and so that's it was finished last year. So that's also something that is a big part of what we do, and so we feel like that carries over into this sustaining of engagement and communication with Northern communities. Another thing we've heard a lot about is just the possible structures that we could have in the next plan. And so that's whether or not we have the same framework around a few critical issues. We have things are separate or things are more cross-cutting. And do we build it with the same number of policy drivers, or do we have a fewer numbers of goals as well? Because right now there's a lot going on in the current plan. So is that still working, or do we want to sort of try to simplify things a bit more? Next slide. Another way is to reach out to the plan development director, Nikush Carlo, or Meredith Valley, or Sarah Bowden with the IARPC Secretariat. So those other people that are very much involved in developing this next plan. And then I think we have one more slide, but that's more of a discussion, I think. Is that right, Meredith?
Yes, that's right. I think right now it would be good to open it up just to general questions on what has been shared so far.
Yeah, so if folks have general questions on what the plan is, anything that came up, we could talk about those now. Or Colleen or Amy, if you have things you want to add that I missed during the presentation, that would be great too.
This is Gay Sheffield. I have a question.
Hi, Gay. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm with UAF Alaska Sea Grant here in Nome. For the Arctic Research Plan, how does this also incorporate some of the regulatory obligations or management obligations that federal agencies already have to do? Like I'm looking at, or I'm thinking about, we have a lot of questions about the health and numbers or just health of the ice seals, so ice associated seals. But when we look at the way the system's set up, when we look to the research arm for seals, their focus is on getting the population counts. So are you looking, is that part of this research plan? Like that's considered research, or would the research arm be able to, you know, you're looking outside to the larger research community here to look at potentially if SEAL's health was an issue. Is that something that would go in the research plan, or would that go to the federal agency that does research, is mandated to do research on SEALs, but already has, I guess, their hands full doing what their mandatory obligation is? How does that separate out in this research plan?
Well, so, I mean, I can take a first stab at it, but it's open to discussion from everyone. So, you know, there's both management agencies and research agencies within the IARPC group. So if there's, you know, a request or a highlight on the health of, for example, an ecosystem, or health of a species, or coastal species is something we have currently in the performance elements for this team, then that's research that really needs to take, you know, everyone into consideration, bringing it all together from the research perspective to get you the population estimate, but then also have that conversation with the management agencies about the results and sort of what the next steps might be. And then the identical, you know, also the communications with the community that relies upon that species and that abundance, so that we understand the concerns or the needs for that information and how that is then going to be, you know, worked on by the management agency to make a policy change. So I think that would be an opportunity for this IARPC space to be used in that way, to have all those different people present to listen to all the different information and needs, and then, you know, what might a management agency do with that information in collaboration with the community.
Well, thank you, John. And I guess, because I live here in the Bering Strait region, there's not a part of our ecosystem that isn't being rocked right now by the massive ecological system-wide changes that are going on with the lack of ice now merging the southern and northern Bering Sea ecosystems. And on top of that, we are seeing industry now where we've not seen, I shouldn't say that, we've always had industry in the region, but we see more of it. We're seeing it earlier, and we're seeing new kinds of industry. And I guess I just leave it at that. Thank you.
Yep.
That's part of my concerns about trying to document and inventory increasing activity, magnitudes, and flows and timing. It's Matt Conover.
Can I just say I really like the emerging questions that have to do with problem solving for these northern communities. That kind of solution-based science approach, I think, is a really good. That's really good to hear that that's going to be in there. I don't know how you would simplify the drivers. You have 4 big ones. I don't know how you would reduce those. And I was just curious, you have one of the drivers is global. And so, you know, we obviously, the Arctic is changing a lot because it's going to be ice free in no time. So, you know, I just wonder, how does the kind of the politics of the Arctic come into this at all? Or we just kind of stay away from that and charge ahead? I mean, you know, we have, the Navy has an Arctic roadmap, the Coast Guard has an Arctic roadmap. You know, how much do those documents feed into this process?
Yeah, so Sarah Bowden, would you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So Julie, the policy drivers are the 4 policy drivers that drove the last plan were taken from the National Strategy for the Arctic Region and from the oh, I'm going to get it. I only know the acronym, NSPD 66, which is a presidential directive. And you can find links to those on our website.
Yeah.
And I think there will be an effort to try to tweak those, or at least put them in the context of our current environment. But wholesale changes are probably unlikely to the policy drivers. Your second point was related to the global system.
Well, it's really, I was thinking about these roadmaps that have been put out, and how do those feed into this process, or are those kind of separate from?
Good, very good question, and very timely. We have are in the process of doing a synthesis, 4 different syntheses of strategies and planning documents that are out there. International ones, state ones, local community ones, and federal ones. And so there are 4 syntheses that are being done of all of these different strategies that will be used as background to helping to define the goals of the next plan. So all these different strategies have been narrowed down into a couple-page document, and that will help define what goes into the goals and themes for the next plan. What they'll be particularly helpful for, however, is when the outline is ready, it will provide the federal drafters of the next plan reference points to reach back to. So if there's a goal on XYZ and there's a plan, several plans over here that address that goal, we'll have those linkages already in place. So yeah, they will inform this next plan.
Because I was just thinking, it was only recently that the administration announced the building of these icebreakers. They're not going to be online till 2026, but still there's kind of a, all those things should probably feed into this plan at some point. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for answering that question. Because I just remembered that IARPC had asked for those syntheses to be worked on. So that's in the works with some new folks that are working with IARPC. So yeah, thanks for that update.
This is Gay Sheffield again, UAF Alaska Sea Grant in Nome. Along with what Sarah, you were just talking about, or Julie Brigham-Grete, about the icebreaker fleet and talking about it now, but it's not going to be online until 26. Are you guys in your Arctic research planning, are you looking also at the Port of Nome, which has now passed all the tests for the deep draft expansion project and is just one congressional vote away from this $600 million project to put the deep draft port in Nome? So we have, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has signed off, and it's in the Water Resources Act. If that should be voted on here sometime. Is that those kind of, when you're doing your plan, are you taking into account these things that will be, these other projects that will be, or mandates, whatever they are, that will be transformative for a region regarding research, regarding social and industrial? I mean, is that part of that as well, talking sort of pre-positioning? Thank you.
Anybody from the planning team can jump in here. Gay, thanks for that. We haven't gotten to the level of detail, of this level of detail yet. We're still very much at the, what are kind of the overarching themes and the policy driver level. But as I said, the document, we're taking into account all the plans and strategies that are out there, and we'll be utilizing them as we get to a point where we're thinking about these themes and the research objectives that go with them. Some of the details, like the Port of Nome and icebreakers, I think those will be taken into consideration more at the drafting phase than at the bigger outline phase. But I don't want to prejudge what the plan development steering group will consider and come up with. So sorry, that's not a great answer to that question, but I don't have a firm answer on it. But thanks for bringing, those are the kinds of things that would be great to drop into the Federal Register notice as things for the Plan Development Steering Group to be thinking about.
Thank you, Sarah. That's very helpful. Thank you.
This is Nicole. Can I ask a question further about the planning strategy documents you all are looking at? I'm wondering, does that include like federal agency planning documents, or are the federal writers of the plan expected to represent some of those ideas and plans that other federal agencies have? And also, are they Arctic specific plans, or do you know what I mean? Like we have like a water resources mission area plan that isn't Arctic specific, but would be water resources specific.
So I don't have the list of documents, but it's several hundred long. So I don't, I can't answer the which plans are there, but there are the federal plan list. I don't know, Meredith, it's probably 40 or 50 documents long. And as I said, there is a synthesis of it. In addition, the federal agencies have, over the past 2 months, been pulling together their input to the plan, which they were given an opportunity to present to the IARPC staff group recently. And that also will be taken into consideration in the planning process. So the agencies do have an opportunity to weigh in and provide input.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Nicole, this is John. And the agencies also have representatives on what's called the principals group, which is sort of the higher level, director level group that will review and provide additional input. So I think at some point they will all be looking at this and reminding maybe the Plan Development Committee of anything we might be missing from a broad strategic standpoint for individual agencies or consortiums of agencies. So we hope that we have received the input thus far in the big lists of plans that some of the folks have already mentioned that we've started to go through. But if not, I think there's opportunity either for for the comment you just made, you could put that in the input window on the ARPC page, or I think there's an opportunity that some of that will be reviewed and caught at a later date. But if not, that's a great, a comment or something you could send to us, that plan, that water resources plan, in case we are missing it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep, I'm going to put my email in the chat and you can send that to me.
Other ports are being considered up in Kotzebue and Point Hope, the Arctic coast, North Slope. They're related to erosion issues, as well as the economic activities up there. I think John said last year that EDA is involved in this through NOAA, U.S. Department of Commerce. And I know that it's not being addressed right now because of policy issues, but you might want to just note that other communities are working on port funding as well.
Yeah, and Matt, are you aware of any sort of economic strategic plans for the Arctic or coastal development plans that maybe we would want to take a look at?
When I was planning director up there, we developed a nano-regional strategy, which was to institute local control and leadership on the whole region of Northwest Alaska, east up the Kobuk to the Ambler Mining District, and north up the Noatak, and up the coast to Point Hope above Kivalina. So all these resource maps were put into a coastal zone management plan, but that whole program got scuttled at the state level. And since then, National Science Foundation funded a 5-year research project to document subsistence reliance on that. And roads are being built into the upper Ambler Mining District right now, being worked on. I think we have somebody, Jeff Curry from DOT, probably knows more about that. And local roads and trails programs that serve those local areas, and demand for gravel for community facilities like housing pads and sewer and water systems. And the economic strategy has been refined in the last 2 years, I think, by consultants for the Northwest Arctic Borough. And there was, during the OCS leasing program through the Minerals Management Service for the Chukchi Sea, a flotilla of ships related to oil drilling that came up. There were 14 in Kotzebue Sound at one point in one day. And so that kind of activity was going on at the same time as the beluga whales were calving or doing whatever they do down there at South End near Deering. So there are overlay issues of migrations and temperature changes going on with the melting of the ice cap, drawing different temperature waters up from the tropics, and the salt and salinity and the krill following them, and the predator-prey relationships drawing up salmon and whales. And you probably know all about that already from your own research projects, the news, but that's all got to be considered when there's port activities like shipping. We handled it at that time with advisory boards of elders with veto power over ore truck hauling down to the port near Kivalina. And Kivalina itself is being relocated off that erosion of the spit across the lagoon to the base of the hills over there. And they're getting a school funded up there. And that Project Chariot near Point Hope and nuclear waste drums they found up there have all been cleaned up. But those are still potential issues related to activity. I'm stopped right there.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt.
Are-
So Meredith, do we, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, is anyone involved in this? I just downloaded this report the other day. I haven't actually had a chance to read it because it's one of those long ones. It's a mapping of the coast of Alaska 10-year strategy in support of the United States economy, security. It's USGS, NOAA, Alaskan Ocean Observing System. Are any of you involved in that?
So this is the ocean mapping initiative.
It's mapping the coast of Alaska is the title of the document. It just came out.
I guess I haven't read that document, but I know USGS has been, recently completed mapping of the whole North Slope and has moved on to a phase of the Northwest Alaska coast. So detailed mapping of that for, shoreline change information. And then the state of Alaska department has also been really doing a lot of that work with local communities to monitor that change. But yeah, I'm not familiar with that plan, but we could take a look at that too.
I could send it to Meredith and maybe you
Great,
can
thanks.
I just put a link in the chat to what I think Julie's talking about.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not involved in it, but it was pretty easy to Google.
Yeah, okay, great.
Hi, this is Jill Pruitt from the Alaska Ocean Observing System. And yeah, we are part of the report. I don't know if Amy Holman is still on the call or not. She might know more about it since I'm fairly new to AUS, but we have a staff member that is a coastal mapping strategy specialist working with Alaska Department of Natural Resources on this project. And so if you want more information after you've read the report, I definitely recommend you reach out to AUS and we can put you in touch with whoever you need to talk to.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So Meredith, do we want to go to your last slide or to the team page?
Sure.
Just in the last few minutes that we have.
Yeah, I wonder what would be most helpful to start by looking at the performance elements or I guess I'll just start with these kind of general questions here.
Yeah, and some of these might be maybe a little difficult if folks aren't super familiar with the current research plan, but maybe that if people are interested in providing comments, that would be a great thing to browse and sort of take a look at in relation to your area of expertise and existing strategic plans that you know of, or some of the new ones that have come out, and sort of what you think, compared to what the existing plan looks like, sort of what you think maybe we should either continue to be doing or change. And then the second statement, we've really been trying to get out, to get perspectives on what are, the current needs of Arctic residents. Gay Sheffield talk about, sort of the bringing together of the research products with the management agencies. So that's a great one, to be able to make that connection a bit stronger, perhaps, to bring researchers into conversations more with the management agencies and the needs of Arctic residents, to sort of, have a better discussion of sort of research results or observations from local communities. So yeah, so I can just stop there and see if people have any reactions to any of the prompts here. But it'd be great to get any of your feedback on this.
So all those regional boroughs and other tribal governments related to them all have plans ongoing or in place. And those federal agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Subsistence Management, outreach groups have local advisory boards. I guess those are all going to be considered as part of those existing documents that have those ongoing processes. Okay.
Yep, that's right. And we've actually already briefed some of those co-management councils, and that's also on the IARPC webpage. There's a timeline of all the different groups that have been briefed thus far on the plans for developing this next Arctic research plan. Meredith was also at the AFN convention in Fairbanks. What was that, last fall? Was kind of the kickoff to try to reach different groups there. And so there are plans to continue to do that, although that's a lot more difficult these days. But yeah, really trying to cast a wide net and looking for all those co-management groups and local advisory groups to make sure they're aware of this and get their input.
Yeah, they are on our mailing list for our newsletter, and anyone can sign up for the newsletter. I put the link in the chat to our plan development page, and on there is a spot to sign up for the newsletter. So we've been on a monthly basis sending out updates.
So this is,
Excuse me, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
The global policy theme should have something building off of what Julia was saying about the military operations because of their increasing activity of China with Russia and shipping to Europe to cut off the 4 days off of travel through the Panama Canal, and their efforts in various countries to invest supposedly in land for various economic activities, but are then installing telecommunications bases that, and it's all related to work the U.S. State Department is doing with China as well, with other countries trying to deal with the potential for spying and the impacts of laying cable on the along the shore, even though they're contractors for Canada, and the potential for monitoring U.S. submarine activity up there. It's not my central area, but I've been watching it. That has potential environmental impacts and needs for environmental information regarding depth and the contour mapping of the polar basin. And the activities of beluga whales and other species of whales that are moving north.
Mm-hmm. And Gay, did you have a comment too?
I have a question, I guess, and when you're doing your Arctic research plan, I got a lot of questions actually, but one of the things, you know, when I look at your questions here, what's changed since 2016 in terms of the needs of Arctic residents? Okay, for that one, you guys we're focusing on the research needs, but one of the things that is really apparent, especially now, because everything is done like this, like Zoom or internet, because we're not doing the face-to-face, the digital divide is huge right now. In Western Alaska, in the Bering Strait region, sure, the North Slope Borough, politically, financially robust. Same with Northwest Arctic Borough. But once you get south into the Bering Strait region, which is not a borough, right? And we're not politically and financially robust as some of our neighbors to the north. You can do, and you can ask all these great questions about how's the research going? What do you need? But if people cannot hear you and cannot participate because of a digital divide, and I don't know, I don't know if that's something that you guys are going to put in there as you know, we can do all this great stuff, but if we're not reaching the people because they just can't, other than a telephone or, you know, write in, and right now we're having some real internet issues throughout the Bering Strait region. People can't use their phones properly. There's really, landlines are not something that people have anymore. I do, but it's mostly cell phone. So is that something that can be addressed under in a basic framework way, so that there is a voice for Western Alaska?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I really do think there is a way to do that, Gay, just given the amount of input that we have from so many different people about the need for effective communication. And so that, yeah, I think that can definitely be part of that overall objective. And that's something that Meredith and I were talking about right before we started the meeting, was that in the current Arctic research plan, you know, most of the engagement, if you will, with Alaska communities and northern residents is within the performance elements for the coastal resilience team. But we really feel like that needs to be across all teams and a main goal of the next Arctic research plan. So here's the two top performance elements, or the, you know, the first two performance elements for this team. And they aren't as explicit as in the other teams for this current Arctic research plan, and that has to change. And I think when you talk about engagement and communication, it comes to your point exactly about how are you going to do that effectively when there is the digital divide that we're very much aware of. And, you know, I will say, as part of the engagement strategy, Nakush Carlo has reached out to communities like ABCP and other groups in Western Alaska to find out not only the best ways to communicate with them, but how to get their feedback, and also ways to potentially support the current networks that they have for sharing information among communities, and then also back to us to see if there's some way that we can support those networks and not just take what we need. So there's a lot of discussion about the best ways to do that, and Nakush is helping us navigate all that. But your comments are still really important, and yeah, we'll make sure that that's, you know, considered as we move forward with how to continue to do this engagement across the entire plan and not just within one collaboration team.
Great, thanks, John.
Yeah. So we just have a few minutes left, and since we're on this page, I guess I would like to ask folks sort of about collaboration team structure going forward in the next plan. You know, this team is called Coastal Resilience. That was identified back when this plan was drafted and written as an emerging issue and something that deserved a team. So the name itself, Coastal Resilience, you know, there's a focus on the coast. And a lot of the performance elements are that way. And we don't know if this team will still be in the next Arctic research plan, or will be reformed in around a different set of priorities. So I guess I'd just be curious for people's feedback on that. You know, do we feel like coastal resilience is still an emerging sort of priority, a consistent priority, or would it be rephrased as sort of general community resilience, or coastal, and the coastal sort of research part would be part of maybe a marine focused team. So just kind of your thoughts on that, if you don't mind, before we end the meeting.
Can I just say, it seems more important than ever to keep this type of team together because of that interaction of humans and the coastline and all the activities going on. To me, to separate, sea level rise and erosion and put it into some other group and not have it involved with resilience would not make sense at this point. That's just my 2 cents. To me, this seems more important than ever that you wouldn't want to change the focus. Maybe this group, more than a lot of others, is really maturing into something that's really going to be so super relevant given the number of coastal areas that are asking, what, my child's 5 years old, what's the world going to look like when he or she is 45 years old? They want to know. So I think this is really important.
Okay, thanks for that. Anyone else?
I'm trying to figure out a way to create that linkage between the inland mining activity and road building with the coast. If there's some way to deal with those issues. Those are based on native corporation investments with multinational mining companies, and they have helped create the prosperity of that Northwest region. And there are other proposals for gold mining and other kinds of mines and pipeline extensions to serve projected economic development down in the AVCP area. And there's all kinds of, well, I think another draft of your plan already dealt with that. Oh, that was a state plan on natural resources and economic development. There still is a linkage there between the interior and the coast that should be addressed. And especially melting permafrost is related to erosion, but any activity on that sodden silt soil creates erosion and slumping, even caribou moving across it naturally. And that affects the river gravels for spawning salmon.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt.
Yep.
Anyone else have a comment on the team?
This is Nicole. I agree with everything that Julie said. I think it's really important that there's this connection between the coast, the idea of resilience, and the communities. And I would worry that having a marine focus might take some focus off of the whole socio-ecological system and the community needs.
And there's a comment in the chat from Vladimir. I agree that the coastal should be a separate team since it is on the interface and has very specific problems different than interior or purely marine.
This is Andrew Metzger on that same thread. My background's in civil engineering and coastal engineering. So I try to take products from the scientists and translate it into something where I can design something that might stabilize the shoreline, that kind of thing. So there's plenty of room for, if there's going to be more applied research, I think there's plenty of room for the applied, on the applied side or applied research in the coastal engineering realm, for sure.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Well, we're almost there to the end of the meeting, and I want to be respectful of where people need to go next. But Meredith or Colleen or Amy, do you have anything else you want to add before we close?
I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for coming and providing input and ideas. It's really valuable. I know it's not easy these days to carve out time for these things. So I really appreciated the conversation and ideas. It made me think a lot. So thank you.
And I will say, the next few meetings for this team will continue to focus on the development of the next plan so that we continue to get feedback from different people that want to come in. So we will continue to devote a significant amount of time of these Teams meetings to just talking about plan development. So if you want to continue this conversation, look out for our next meeting. And yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks for facilitating, John. Great job.